July 1917. The First World War has been raging for 3 years, and there is no end in sight. From the North Sea to the Swiss Alps, the Western Front, a 440-mile-long stretch of fortified trenches, remains a stalemate. For the Entente, the Allied powers of France, Britain, and Russia, victory seems out of reach. A series of simultaneous attacks from the French and the British, the Nivelle Offensive, launched earlier that spring, had failed to break through German defenses. Meanwhile, the German Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire are claiming victories against the Russians in the east, while the Ottomans have bitterly fought back 2 offensives from Egyptian-British forces in Palestine. Things were not going well for the Allies in early 1917. Elements of the French army have mutinied. The Russian government and its military are on the brink of collapse, and although the Americans have joined the war, it will be many months until they are ready to send troops into battle. The only Allied power able to fight the Germans is the British Empire. Battered, but not broken, after the brutal fighting along the Somme River the previous year, the Commander-in-Chief of the British Expeditionary Force, Sir Douglas Haig, is desperate to bring on a renewed offensive against the Germans, who have taken a defensive posture in northern France and Belgium. The Allies have decided on centering the battle around the village of Ypres, in Flanders. The small Belgian town had been the site of 2 previous engagements, and tenuously remained in Allied hands. A major offensive in the Flanders region had been planned for several years, but Haig believed that a breakthrough would lead to a decisive victory in the west. His plan was bold and daring. 50 British divisions would launch an attack on German positions, heavily entrenched on the high ground surrounding Ypres. The goal was to take the 3 ridges surrounding the town, and afterwards march to the sea and take the harbors of Ostend and Zeebrugge, where the Germans held their submarine ports. The operation would end up centering around a very small village just below the eastern ridge, called Passchendaele. The Battle of Passchendaele was, in fact, a series of battles within a large engagement, now known as the Third Battle of Ypres. The preliminary attack began on the 7th of June, 1917. Called the Battle of Messines, the British fired more than 4 million rounds of artillery on the German positions and detonated 19 mines underneath them. Throughout the day, British infantry advanced towards the far end of Messines Ridge, under heavy German machine gun and artillery fire. By June 10th, General Hubert Gough's Fifth Army had taken headquarters north of Messines Ridge and began planning the main attack. They would be facing the German Fourth Army, commanded by General Frederick Bertram Sixth von Arnim, and overseen by Field Marshal Ruprecht, Crown Prince of Bavaria. By 1917, the German army had adopted a defense-in-depth posture. 3 groups would defend their position. Each would be divided into frontline Stellungsdivision and reserve support Eingriff divisions. The main attack began at 3:50 a.m. on the 31st of July, near Pilkem Ridge. The British and French advanced in darkness, taking nearly 4,000 yards, but the Germans counterattacked, suffering heavy casualties but managing to push the Allies back. Then it started to rain, and it would not stop for a whole month. Heavy artillery and machine guns turned the field into a sodden wasteland. The infantry and tanks were unable to advance any further. As the artillery fell, the rain turned the ground into a dense, muddy swampland. On August 10th, after over a week of rain delays, the attack recommenced at Westhoek, on top of the plateau overlooking the field. The German positions in the area had been heavily fortified there since 1915. They had built solid concrete machine gun nests from which they could unload fire on anyone advancing towards them. Under heavy fire, the British Second Corps attacked, but were beaten back by a German counterattack that evening. The rain and mud was unrelenting. Wounded soldiers taking refuge in shell holes would drown as it filled with rain. Men would get stuck in the mud and sink into the earth, never to be seen again. Despite the growing losses and the unyielding rain, the British and the French attacked again at Longmark on the 16th of August, and again the Germans counterattacked. German artillery was very effective at isolating divisions, halting and breaking the British advances. Very little ground had been gained in the first month, prompting Haig to suspend the operation. By the end of the summer of 1917, German morale remained high. Their losses were more manageable than Allied losses, and the British territorial gains were minimal. The Battle of Menin Road Ridge was fought between the 20th and 25th of September, after a brief dry spell from the rain. The British, bolstered by artillery strikes on German machine gun nests and aerial reconnaissance, launched a general attack on a front of over 8 miles. The new tactics, including British General Hubert Plumer's bite and hold strategy, which had British troops make small advances, dig in, and repel local counterattacks before advancing again, had seen the British make large gains. The tactic made advancing slightly slower, but when the Germans counterattacked, instead of finding tired and beleaguered troops at the end of a long advance, they found a fortified line supported by artillery. The Germans would counterattack 2 more times until the 25th, but were repelled. By the beginning of October, the Germans had been beaten back and held their positions on the Gouvel Plateau. The British had fought back several counterattacks, and now the trenches were filled with men from Australia and New Zealand, known as Anzacs, as well as Canada, South Africa, India, and the Caribbean. It would be the Australians and the Canadians that would bear the brunt of the fighting until the end of the attack. The first attempt at gaining ground near the village took place on the 9th of October, but the ground gained was lost by a German counterattack later in the day. The British would try again on the 12th, only to be beaten back again. There were 13,000 Allied casualties on that day alone. Among them were 845 New Zealanders, lying dead and dying in the mud of no man's land. Haig would again call for a halt in the operation the next day. Erich Ludendorff, Quartermaster General of the German Chief of Staff, was optimistic that Passchendaele would hold, while Sixth von Arnim and Fritz von Losberg, the newly appointed Chief of Staff for Fourth Army, convinced themselves that falling back to more defensible positions was out of the question. The Canadian Corps was sent to relieve the battered Anzac troops. By the end of the battle, at least 16,000 Canadians would be dead, wounded, or missing. On the 26th of October, the Canadians made the first of 3 planned attacks, swiftly capturing their objectives around the village before being halted by another German counterattack. The second attack took place on the 30th. They launched a simultaneous attack on the southern and northern flank of the Germans defending the town, capturing the farmland just outside it. On November 6th, after a few days free from the rain, the village was captured. It took nearly 4 months to capture the village and for the British to advance only 5 miles. No one knows for sure how many lives were lost. The British suffered casualties anywhere between 250,000 and 300,000, of which 50,000 were dead. Germans may have suffered at least 2,200,000 casualties, and the dead would be anywhere from 20 to 40,000. Almost exactly a year after the Battle of Passchendaele, Germany would sign an armistice with the Entente. It is hard to say whether the Battle of Passchendaele was a success. Haig claimed it was, and the British General Staff, some of them at least, were content to let it be so. Others, however, criticized Haig, saying that there was little to no strategic value in capturing Passchendaele. In early 1918, during the German Spring Offensive, the British would abandon their positions along the Passchendaele Ridge. The land that thousands of men fought, bled, and died for was surrendered without firing a shot.